Well, it's 1:03 Eastern Time, so thank you everyone for joining us. With me, I have Henric Trotzig from Happo. And Henric, how are you? Welcome.
I'm good.
And I'm Gleb
How are you?
Bahmutov from Cypress. I'm doing great as well. So this webinar is actually exciting because visual testing is one of those topics where it's hard to do yourself, but it provides a lot of value. So in this webinar, we're going to cover visual testing with Happo. I'll briefly mention why visual testing is difficult, and then we'll go for an example application, which is like a music player. We'll have a couple of tips and tricks from like my experience and Henric's experience. And then Henric will do a demo of the pull request flow when you're trying to change something in application and visual testing catches a regression. And at the end, like I said, we'll have 15 minutes for questions and answers. So Henric, why don't you tell us what visual testing actually is, please?
Yeah, so visual testing with Happo or any tool that you're using. I know there was you did a webinar with Percy a while back, and Happo is sort of similar to Percy. I'll talk about the differences as we go through this presentation. But basically, visual testing gives you a couple of things, and I'll highlight three of those here. The first thing that isn't the most obvious one, but the one that I see a lot of our customers and a lot of the people that I worked with doing visual testing, and also for myself, just doing visual testing in the past. It's all about shortening feedback cycles. So you want to be able to move confidently with the change that you're making. And the faster you get the feedback on what the impact of this change is, the better it is for you. The faster you can ship things, the faster you can, and the more confident you are. So shortening feedback cycles is really key here. Second thing is, and this, I guess this is the most obvious one, sorry. I just need to remove this thing so I can read the text. So the most obvious thing that people think about when they think about visual testing and screenshot testing is to catch bugs or visual regressions. So they manage to get to a state in their application where everything looks the way it's supposed to do, or close to it at least. And then they want to keep that pristine UI, the nice looking UI that they've built. And they want to prevent others from making mistakes. So catching visual regressions is another big part. And then if I were a salesperson, which I'm not, well, I guess I am, but if I would talk to salespeople, they would say, well, aren't people replacing expensive manual testing? Aren't they saving money doing this? And I would say, yes, in some cases, but in most cases, people aren't actually doing this because it's way too expensive. And so to illustrate that, let me move to this slide. And so humans are inherently terrible at finding differences in UI and images overall. So if we look at these two images, this is from a component I wrote a while back showing a hotel. And if we look at these, there's no way of like actually figuring out if a change was introduced and what that change was. So if we feed this into a visual testing tool, and in this case, this is a screencast of Happo's review flow. And I'll just wait for the cycle to go back to that diff view. If we look at the diff, we can quickly see that we have two changes here. There's one in those indicators under the image, and then there's one, the border radius or the radius of the button. So those two things are really easy to spot once you have a tool like this. And then you might say, well, does those changes matter? And well, in this case, it might not. But if we look at some of the CSS that could cause this change to appear, and these can be really subtle. So CSS, as all of you know that's been doing CSS, CSS can be very global or is global. And so you can change some CSS structure somewhere, and then you can break parts of the UI that you didn't think you would break. So in this case, we made a change to a general item container. What does that mean? No one really knows. And in this case, it was used for that indicator under the image. So we moved that 5 pixels. That was unintended. And then the second one was, and I don't know if you can spot this, but the border radius on button got messed up because we misspelled border. So if we had spelled it right, we would have seen the border area. So that was actually an actual regression introduced here. So just finding these differences, and you might say that these small differences are okay, but over time, bad things tend to happen to a UI. It'll look good once you start with it, and once the designer has sort of signed off on the look and feel, and then over time things starts to break. So this was an actual, this is from Docker Hub, and I took a screenshot of their UI today. I was on their website because I have some Docker images hosted there, and just look at some of these nav items here. They're just like, and I don't think these didn't look this way. I mean, something happened along the way. Some of these buttons can't actually be clicked anymore because they're overlapping and can't reach them. So this is also like an accessibility issue. If anyone is from Docker Hub and you see this, we can
fix
set up
it.
some
Please fix it.
Yep. Well, yeah. I mean, this is sort of this is on a smaller screen. On the big screen, it looks fine. So that's basically visual testing and why we need tools like this.
So we have a question to the audience, right? There is a poll. Are you using visual testing right now? So we have more than 200 people joining. I wonder if people are already using something or want to use something, right? Maybe using an open source tool where they, take snapshots and do the image diffing themselves, or maybe use a third-party commercial tool like Happo, Percy, Apple tools. Let's give folks maybe 30 seconds more. And Henric, here's something that I can tell you right now, looking at 10% of people that are using third-party commercial tool.
Yep.
You potentially can reach 90% of the audience today.
Yeah, that sounds great.
You said you're not a salesperson, but please work hard.
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. This is great because this means that you came to the right webinar.
Nice. I like looking at these slides go back and forth. It's very interactive.
Excellent. I think we get the general consensus. Most of the people are not using anything. Yeah, why don't we move on and tell us about Happo as a company?
Yeah, sure. So brief history of Happo. I got into visual regression testing back in 2013, and I want to bring up that image because I was working with this guy, Joe Lencioni. Joe Lencioni and I, we moved offices. This was in San Francisco. We took over the old GitHub office. This was when we were working at a company called Causes. They're not around anymore, but Joe and I were working for Causes. We grabbed the best standing desk in the house, and we decided that we would be working on front-end infrastructure. So that's how it all started. So Joe and I started working on front-end infrastructure, and we built an open source project, and then we presented it back in 2014 at a conference called Camp SAS, a local San Francisco conference. And it was all fun. And the Happo as an open source tool started sort of growing a little bit. Some people started adopting it. Joe and I split ways. He started working for Airbnb, and I started working on this, on Happo.io, which was the software as a service product. So Joe got involved in adopting Happo at Airbnb, and I got involved in building Happo.io. And so in 2017, Happo.io launched, and a couple of things that, so I never did this to, my goals of building Happo and building the software as a service product was always to make Happo better. And the things that I wanted to do was improve performance, because visual regression testing at that time wasn't fast enough. So I wanted to make it fast, and I also wanted to make it cross-browser. So
Right.
the main goal for me was to launch Happo with IE support, and I added IE support in 2018 or 2019, and it was great to see user interfaces going through testing in different browsers as well, because we've always been we were doing Firefox testing. We were also mainly focusing on full page tests. And so we would spin up an application, and then we would crawl the website, going to different URLs, taking a screenshot of all the different pages. And then that got us into a lot of trouble, because we needed the screenshots to be consistent. So we had to work a lot on like removing counters, removing dates, and mocking stuff. And it got to its own sort of big project itself. So after that, we sort of switched strategies a little bit, and then we focused more on components. So this was also at a time when React was getting adopted more. So we started using React, and we decided to put all our React components to test. So we wrote a test suite that would take all our components and run them through a different props or like input params, and then render them and then take a screenshot. So we ended up with this huge test suite with components, and that made a lot of things easier. When we're not dealing with the full pages, the screenshots were much more consistent, which meant that we could do things that improved performance overall of the Happo service. So it's sort of moving from full page into component centric. And this I'll show you a little bit about this in the introduction to the Happo Cypress module as well, the integration there, because we always need an element to screenshot as opposed to just taking screenshots throughout the application, and we'll get to that. And then I wanted to walk you through sort of the basic Happo flow. This is common for all types of integrations, whether you're using Storybook or you're writing your own test suite, or you're using Cypress as a test generator. This is the basic flow. So we run the test suite to generate a set of screenshots, okay? And then we compare those screenshots with a known base. And this is sort of, this is always comparing to, Happo can compare to any sort of base, but if you're doing a pull request model, you will be comparing screenshots with the base commit of the pull request. So if you have a commit going from foo to bar, commit shaws, and there might be a couple of commits in between, we will compare foo and bar. So there's no concept of like a baseline for Happo. Happo always compares with whatever you're comparing your pull request with. And then if there are no diffs, you'll just get a green check saying everything is fine, you don't need to look at this. Or if there's a diff, there's a manual process involved. So remember that visual diff tool that I was showing in the beginning with those two hotels. You will see a screen with all those diffs, and then you get a chance to approve or reject those changes. So if there are changes that you intended, you can approve them. If they're unintended, you reject them. And then you merge the PR with a lot of confidence, like a Swedish person going through IKEA to buy furniture. We all know the names, we all know the combinations, we just buy them. I'm kidding.
Nice.
And so, and over to you, Gleb.
So I want to mention why this is hard to do yourself, right? And why Happo has been around for 7 years and there are other companies doing it as a service. So my education, my grad school was in computer vision, right? And even I, like, after teaching panoramas and doing image comparison, like I would not do it myself, right? And it's not just the generation of those little images, it's everything after that, right? So recently I recorded a series of videos where I take a Sudoku game and I try to show, here's how you generate a screenshot. Here's how you compare with our screenshot. So if you look at the list of videos that I made, and each one is like, let's say 3-4 minutes, bunch of them are not about making a screenshot. The screenshot is the easiest one if you use one browser. The rest is like, how do you make the screenshot that's consistent between every browser and every platform, right? Where do you store the images? How do you deal with like images moving together with your commit and source code as you make pull requests? Who's updating? Who's reviewing things? How do you show the diffs? So even after all those videos, I'm still not done. I still have to record more videos, right? And continue work just to get to like basics of image diffing. And if I use third-party service, it would be like 1-2 line of like configuration code and then using third-party service. So you can do it yourself. Please try it out. But I think there is value to using third-party service. So yeah. Henric, you want to go for example app because you cloned it and
Sure. So this is the example app that we're going to be testing. I'm not a user of Apple Music myself, so this wasn't too familiar to me, but I can definitely tell that there's an Apple UI being implemented here. So there's a basic first screen where you can select artists, albums, playlists. You can select a song and then you can play it. It will play in your browser through this nice little player. And it sort of looks different depending on how large the screen estate is. So we'll see some responsive styling there as well. Let's see. So if we look at this, and this is a recording of, let me just start that. This is a recording of, oh, this is actually you, Gleb, going through the application, which is basically the same thing that the test will do. Yes. So this is a person doing the thing that the test will do once we get there.
And I was just trying to like show the main features of the app, right? Kind of like a feature tour. Because if those features work, I know the application mostly works. So when I went and I written the test there, it pretty much goes one-to-one with what a user is doing in that movie. So let me click on the next slide. Okay, so this is the test. Henric, do you mind kind of walking through this test because the controls are fast on your side?
Yeah, there are some special casing here that I introduced. Well, basically we start the app. We need two screens here. The first one, there's a loading screen. I'll show this in more detail once we get to the demo. There's a loading screen that we want to test. So once it's fully loaded, it has the selector data test welcome closing, which is kind of awkward, but we want to make sure that's visible. And then we make sure that it's also removed from the screen so that it's not visible. So then we go to picking an album. We click the artist link, and then we click Coldplay because it starts with a C, and I haven't actually listened to Coldplay. I know there's a lot of Coldplay fans, so I thought I'd get some of those involved with Happo, but I've never listened too much to Coldplay. So we click the Head Full of Dreams album, and then we select the song Hymn for the Weekend. And then we just assert a couple of things. Oh, actually, so one thing we do, the mini player controls are shown at the very bottom of the screen. To make the test consistent or the screenshot consistent, we actually pause the audio as soon as possible. And then
why do we do it, Henric?
Huh?
Why do we do that? Why do we pause?
I just wanted the scrubber or like the progress to be at 0.
Right.
So that's why. And then we click the mini controls wrapper, and that brings up the big large player controls. And then we can try that. If we click play, we should see a pause button. And if we click pause, we can close the controls. So that's our test case. So if we look at that as it's recorded, we see the loading screen, we see some clicks, and we're done. Okay.
Yeah. So this test only confirms that the app functions, right? That it can actually have a button to play and pause, right? We have not asserted anything about how it looks, and it has to look, good, right? And it does look good. So why don't we continue with your work after this?
Yeah,
right?
let's see. Okay, so first of all, some disclaimers here. I did make some changes to the application in the process of sort of testing this application out. I replaced some API calls with local data. This was partly just to make the demo less reliant on some external API, because it was fetching data from an external API. So that's all gone. And then I did disable some animations. And I want to talk briefly about this because most of the time you don't actually have to disable any animations, because Happo will do that at screenshot time. So once you send your, once you ask Happo to take screenshots, it will silence the application. It won't actually do any animations. But there was a couple of animations here where it would first show the content with zero opacity, so completely transparent. And then it would, on like a couple milliseconds later, it would add another class that would fade them in. The problem with that for us was that we were taking the snapshot right at the time when the opacity was 0. So I removed those fade-ins. And as a result of that, the application sort of feels a little bit wonky as compared to the original application. And so these are some of the things that you might have to play around with when you're doing, when you're writing Happo tests. But most of the time, you don't have to actually do anything. And then we added some data test attributes. And I believe, is this like a good practice, Gleb?
We do recommend using specific attributes to select and interact with elements and find them on a page, rather than like relying on CSS classes, because those can change. Yeah,
that was my feeling too. So those are the changes that we made to the app. Apart from that, it's just the app that as we saw it.
Right. And we didn't even write it. We just found it.
Yeah. And kudos to the person who wrote this application. It's been a lot of fun trying it out. I think we have a link to it somewhere. So, but if not, we'll make sure to link to that person. And then in this demo, we'll also run. So Happo, you can run Happo with Cypress locally, and it'll create the screenshots for you. But the real value of a tool like Happo is when you're doing it in CI. So in CI, and if you're doing pull requests, for instance, Happo will detect that you're trying to compare two different commits. And so it will give you a report showing all the diffs for those two commits. And so we're going to use Circle CI here. And we're also going to use the Cypress orb. An orb is sort of a package or functions that, or configurations, I guess, that others can provide for you. And in this case, Cypress has written this orb, which simplifies a lot of things when you're setting up in Circle CI. Yeah, Gleb.
And Henrik, we don't really care about the CI, like which CI. You can run it on any CI, right? Yeah, it's completely independent. Yeah. So we just like Circle because it's the shortest config that we could use. For
also, I have an account there. So I'm using it personally, so it was easiest to set up.
And also Happo has its own orb, right? That makes configuring Happo on Circle easier. We have a link right here.
Yes. So there's the Happo orb as well. The Happo orb, so the Happo orb itself is a test runner also, which means, and it's not compatible with the Cypress setup. So make sure you're not trying to use the Happo orb for the Cypress Happo integration. But if you're doing any other type of integration, you can use the Happo orb. And then there's a link to a documentation here, Happo docs, on how to set up continuous integration if you're using a Cypress integration with Happo. Perfect. So make sure to check that out. So when you have set up things in CI and you have configured Happo, Happo will post these build statuses to the pull request or the commit itself. And in this case, So in some cases, you'll see this. Happo will say, well, I found no diffs, so everything is fine. It'll give you the thumbs up or a green check. If you have diffs, you'll see this failing check. And failing in Happo's case doesn't actually mean that something is broken. It just means that you should have a look at these diffs. So if you have a look at them and then approve them, that status will get cross-posted back to the pull request. So it'll say approved by whoever approved the report. So we'll look into those details in a second when we do the demo.
Henric, can I say really quickly? And you notice how even when Happo said there was a difference visual, the functional test said the test passed. I mean, functionality was correct, the app was working, but it's just like the corner change or the position of the color element, the visual diff. And that's what Happo found additionally and gave it separate status.
Yeah. So those are, it's important that those things are kept separate, both because I don't want to, the Happo Cypress integration shouldn't interfere with your functional testing. That's a separate thing. But also, Happo will take the screenshots asynchronously after your test suite or along with your test suite. So this means that you won't actually get any worse performance, well, a couple of seconds at most, if you're adding Happo to your test suite, because the functional test will run in the same time. It's just that Happo is doing things on its own and then reporting back through the status.
Yes, async kind of. Okay, so what else did we do here? Yeah,
so to get the Happo Cypress integration, there are a couple of things. There are two libraries or modules that you need to install. There's the main Happo.io module and then the Happo Cypress module. And then these steps are all outlined in the docs referenced here. If you go to docs.happo.io, there's a section on how to set up the Cypress suite. And these are just like copy-paste stuff. What's more important, apart from setting this up, is that you also need a Happo.js configuration. So, and this is sort of the minimal required config. You need API keys that you get through your Happo dashboard or Happo account. And then you specify the targets that you want to take screenshots in. And in this case, we're just adding Chrome, but you can add Firefox, you can add IE11, you can add Microsoft Edge, the old Edge, not the Chrome version. There's Safari and then iOS Safari that runs on an iPhone. And so there are a couple of different targets. And if you sign up for a Happo trial, and if you have a Happo account, none of these are like additionally charged, but they all sort of, so you pay for what the amount of snapshots you take. So if you have a small test suite, you can use a lot of browsers, and you can try out different configs to find the right mix of browsers and viewport targets. So we'll also show, so this is a more fully fledged targets config where we have Chrome in a small screen, we have Chrome in a medium screen, we have some, we add in some Firefox, some IE, and then we have the iOS Safari target. So you can play around with these and they'll show up in your Happo reports. And Gleb, you had a trick here.
I had a trick because how do you select the right size, especially if you are working on a single component at a time? You already have viewport width and height usually in Cypress.json. So because Happo is a JavaScript file, let me click down. Trying to click.
Well, I'll click.
Okay, thank you. Then from Happo.js, you can just load Cypress.json by requiring it and grab the same viewport height and viewport width and use it for your browser targets. So that's my little trick here.
That's nice. I hadn't thought of that. That's nice.
Two minds are always better than one, right?
Well, yeah, definitely. And then this is just an example of how you use Happo. So this is getting into the adding Happo to your Cypress test. And this is sort of confusing because I'm using a different test case here. But I just wanted to show you what the code required to take a snapshot here looks like. So in this case, we're loading some other page, and we grab the nav element, and then we say Happo screenshot. And then you can optionally give this a component name, which I recommend you doing, because otherwise you'll get a generated component name that's kind of long. You give it a component name, and the screenshot will look something like that. In this case, it look like that. And then as we go through the test, we can click the drop-down button in the navbar, and then we take another screenshot. And in this case, we say that, well, now we have the drop-down open. So we still have the same component, but we're saying this variant has the drop-down open. So we get a screenshot looking like that. And then the last thing here is we're also going to grab, in this case, we had a form on the page. We grab the form, and then we give that the component name subscribe form. So that's how to add Happo to your test suite. I'll show you how this is done in the Apple Music case in a second in the demo.
This is really cool.
And then Gleb, you had this, and I really like this trick or this tip.
The tip here is that sometimes when you click on that nav bar, right, you click on the drop down, you cannot take the screenshot immediately because your application might still be doing something and it hasn't rendered the open drop down, right? So when you do things like this, you probably want to add an assertion like this, right? Where in between your action, like click, you check for that element to be open or visible, right? So that Cypress will wait for this assertion to pass, and then you take the Happo screenshot, right? By then, application is showing what you expect it to show.
Yeah, this is a neat trick. We have some examples of that in the Apple Music case as well, so I'll try to show you that. And then I also wanted to call out, because part of what drove this collaboration with Happo and Cypress was that Lightstep, who is a Cypress user and also a Happo user, they reached out to both of us asking, well, can we do Happo visual testing through Cypress? And we all said, well, sure. So we got the integration going, and Lightstep has been tremendous help in moving this module forward, the Happo Cypress integration. We found some bugs. And I really like to thank them for being so transparent and then giving me a lot of feedback on things that aren't working and things that are working. So very, very thankful for that. And they did Cypress webinar a few weeks back, like a month back. So make sure to check that out too. They're a cool company. Okay, let's move on from that, I think.
This is a very real test, and they have a lot of charts and graphs. So for them, adding Happo to the mix was like incredible value, incredible.
Yeah. I wonder if we should just hop into the demo right away, because I think we've been talking about how these tests are working. Did you want to say something about this screen, Gleb, or should I move on?
No, let's move on, because our audience can find the slides online. We'll have a link later. But let's see it in action.
Okay, cool. So I'll just make sure that you can see my. Let me move out of that. So, Gleb, can you just confirm that you're seeing the application running?
Yeah, localhost 3000.
So localhost 3000. That's where we have our application. We can try it out. We can click go through our test case. Click Coldplay, select an album. And then we start the song, and it will actually start playing in a while, but I'll pause that. So that's the application. That's what we're testing. We're also bringing up this full screen mode, which is or full screen controls. So if we switch to the code for a second, let me bring up oops. So this is the same test case that we were seeing before. We have the loading screen, and in this case, we've added a few of these Happo screenshots throughout this test. And notice how I'm always selecting some item here. In this case, I'm actually selecting body, which means I'll take a full screen screenshot. That's fine. But we also have this this test case where we're grabbing just the album button. We have a component called album button. We just grab that component to take a screenshot. And that's really valuable to grab all these small components. We have the minute controls when no track is selected. We have the minute controls when a track is selected. And so let's go to the Cypress test suite. Let's run through this again, and I'll show you how Happo is taking its screenshots. So we can look at the log here on the left. So it's walking us through the application and taking Happo snapshots throughout the test case.
It's amazing, but it doesn't slow down the tests, right?
Yeah.
We're mostly waiting for actual app to work, not taking tests.
Yeah. So so this is slower because I'm also sharing my screen, I think. So once we're all done with these, Happo will kind of cold, kind of slow. That's fine. So this last step, Happo teardown, is the place where Happo sends sort of a payload to Happo server saying, I want screenshots, just grab them for me, okay? So if you're doing this locally, you won't actually notice much about Happo except for these logs that are written to the console. So in this case, Happo is saying, I've got a report for you. So you can go to that report. And we're still waiting for iOS Safari. See if that's getting done. OK, so all the screenshots are done.
That's fast.
And then we can go to the full report. These are just like a list of all the screenshots that we're taking during this process. So, and they're also ordered by, they're in alphabetic order. So we have the album button here. This is how it looks in Chrome. This is how it looks in iOS Safari. We have the artist screen. We have the artist screen on iOS Safari. And these are the large controls, looking good. Same thing for iOS Safari. We have the loading screen or the last step of the loading screen. So when you're doing local development, you're mostly just going to ignore the, well, unless you're like setting up Happo, you're mostly just going to ignore these. But you can have a look at these. And then in my case, I found something that I wanted to fix. So notice how there seems to be like, so at first when I look at this, notice how there's like a missing thing here.
Yeah, yeah.
If we go to the app, we'll see that. How do I get that? Yeah. So I need to unselect the song, I think. Loading app. So there's an Apple icon here. And so at first I thought we actually might have like a Happo bug here. Like, isn't Chrome rendering that icon? What's going on here? So, but if we look at the code, we can see that, let's see, it's in mini controls. So we see that it's just the Apple character. And this character is only available, I think, on Macs or iOS devices. So our goal here is to fix that. So I wanted to prepare a pull request for this. So let's say fix Apple logo. So we create a branch for that. And I'll sort of, let me just prettier that thing. OK. So I'll actually sort of run through this because I did do this once. I did download the logo. So let's move that into the, copy that logo into public images. Let's call it Apple logo SVG. OK. So let's point that out. Logo.svg. OK, so it's interesting to see how the initial state, the no track selected state, is actually modeled as a song or a track. So this is interesting. Well, it was probably a fast way to get this going. So we'll add the icon here. And then where are we? Name. track name, song title. So we'll do track.icon and then track name. Will that work? So if icon is missing, then nothing will be, oh wait, we need to do an image tag here. Track dot. You'll tell me if I'm making any silly mistakes. So we got the track here. Let's prettier that too.
Do we want to remove Apple?
Oh yeah, you're right.
So now we just, yep.
Okay, so this will probably not look good because I think that did I not say that? I thought it was like auto. Ah, it's just really slow. Okay, I did order a new MacBook. It came today, but I never had the time to set it up. So we'll see.
Now, Henrik,
okay.
so, ooh.
Yeah, yeah, that's big.
Yeah.
So I know we're running a little bit short on time. So let's just do this style, height, 15. Is that, oh wait, I forgot something. Okay, this won't look good, but I think it'll look better at least. Okay, that should compile.
But this is like normal flow where you change things, right?
Yeah.
And while the application is, oh,
okay.
Well, at least it's there, right?
Look, yeah, let's commit that. Fix Apple logo, kinda.
And you know, like here, at least you expect some visual changes, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times we're like upgrading library versions, dependencies, and turns out they're different.
Yeah.
And we don't have time for that manual kind of developer check.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully you'll have a number of different browsers here. So you'll fix it and you'll make sure that it looks good in Chrome. Let me just do this.
Yeah,
and we can, yeah. I did this once when I was doing a pull request to one of your projects, Gleb, I think. Okay, okay, one commit, find, fix Apple logo. Okay, so we're gonna create the pull request, and then I think we can switch to questions, and then we'll move back to here once we have the report to look at. Does this sound good?
Yeah, it sounds perfect, right? Because CI needs probably a couple minutes, right, to process everything. So why don't we go to the next slide after the demo slide?
Okay.
And we'll come back to a pull request while we're looking at the questions and answers to see like what's the visual Happo check.
Sorry, this one, right?
I think, yeah, right here with slide.
Okay.
I had a question to the audience, right? So now that you see how the visual diffing works, my question to you, so what would you rather have? A visual diffing like what Henrik is showing, or 100% code coverage? What would give you more confidence that the application is working correctly? Kind of like an interesting question, I think, for me, right? So let's give it maybe 30 seconds. I see
my answer.
Well, what's your answer, Henrik?
Well, actually, I think both 100% code coverage and a snapshot for each application screen. I guess each application screen would work. I mean, I would pick that every day.
I did like your component-focused workflow where you take snapshot of a component, but also take a snapshot of a component with different props, like different variants. Yeah. Like this is so useful.
Yep. A lot of times you can sort of TDD or test-driven development your way into a fix for a component. Like you add a Happo test case for a certain variant, and then you implement it and make sure it looks good.
All right. So I think we get the general sense of what people are preferring after seeing your presentation. So I think you did an excellent job. So why don't we move to tips to the next slide? and see what happens there. This is one of the tricks that I recommend. If you do have dynamic data, like that slider, like a timer, or some dynamic data, before you call the snapshot, you can just hide it. Just set the opacity to 0, and it will be invisible. So if you have like hard to mark data, like in this example that I had, a little bit too far, I had the Sudoku board and the numbers were generated dynamically, but before I take a snapshot, I would just set the opacity to 0. Yes, I have an empty board, but then I can just deal with it later, right? And in this particular test, it removed all dynamic things. Let's see, can I?
There are, so we were playing around with a different application, the Tetris. There was a Tetris application that we tried to get going. And I found this, there's a seed random, I think, math.seed random or something. Right. And I wanted to call out that here because it was kind of neat to have math.random work, but always giving you the same numbers every time. And so I was able to stabilize some of the test cases just by doing that too, but hiding will work too.
Right. This is an example where you try to like deal with random data, where you try to override whatever data is used by your component or page. In this case, stubbing everything. And in this case, you get the same board every time. So no matter how many times you run, you get a stable snapshot because the numbers are the same.
Oh, okay, cool.
So this is another advice. And if everything fails, right, if you cannot remove animations and you see something like this on the left, right, where you see something, but some parts of the text haven't rendered just yet, well, you can just add a wait, right? Just give up. And then you'll have...
Can I do this now? I mean, do you know why the numbers weren't there, the first render?
No, but I'm running like in a Docker container. I think just was slow to render.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So it's not Happo, right? So
I mean, it might be.
It's time for questions and answers. So I'll switch our slider to questions and answers. We have a bunch of questions that I see. Why don't we take a couple before we check on the pull request, right?
Sure.
Henric, you want to take the first one? Actually, can you do a high-level comparison with Percy and Applet tools?
My answer is no. I've never actually done comparisons across. I've tried some of the other tools, but it's never like a focus of mine.
Right.
So I'd refer that to some other like third party doing a test like that. I'd be happy to look at something. Yeah.
Why don't we take the next one? Is Happo open source, right? So what happened to that open source project?
So Happo, the old open source project is still around. It's less useful these days, and it's not heavily maintained. I mean, if there are critical bugs, then we would fix them. But I wouldn't rely on it in production right now, not at its current state.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
What about this question? If UI change frequently, because new features, is it feasible to do visual testing? Like, what do you think was a good approach here?
Oh yeah, definitely. The more your UI changes, the more useful UI testing will become. And
because it shows you the changes, right?
Yeah, like you introduce a new feature and it shows up. And when you're introducing new features, you're usually, if you're doing like development right, you're always like tweaking components, tweaking buttons to make them fit in with your flow, and just having that regression test there is very useful, valuable.
Excellent. What's the daily workflow for our QA testers, right? Like, should we be reviewing failing tests, looking like why it is different?
Yeah, I think the answer to this question is that Happo is more of a tool for developers. So it's sort of, I would say it's catching some of the things that QA will not have to worry about. Like some of the visual stuff that's really hard to do manually should be caught by developers before they merge changes. So, but that also being said, I've had a lot of help from Happo when sharing things with other people who are not developers in our organization. So you can work on a change and you talk to a designer and you send them a link to a Happo diff saying, well, this is what my idea of how this would look like is. And they'll say, oh, that's actually kind of nice. Well,
gotcha.
that looks good. And I think that could definitely be done with people doing QA as well. Just clearing up their time for more important things.
Thank you. Henrik, why don't we go check out on the pull request, right? Because I really want to see the report and your visual diffing tool. Like that widget is something else.
All right. Yeah, this is actually the first time we'll look at the Happo UI. So, okay, so we're back at the pull request. We have our fix Happo logo, kinda. And so it's saying that we have 6 diffs and 8 unchanged. So if we click that details link, we'll open the Happo report here, and it will show us a comparison between the 2 different states. So what was on master before and what's on our branch right now. So we can look at, so a lot of the full page components that we took snapshots of are including this mini controls down here. So we'll see diffs here as well. So we can look at this diff and we'll see that. So if you hover this diff view, it'll also highlight where the diff is. So in this case, it looks like it's only here. So that one looks, I mean, it doesn't look right, but it looks better. And so we can also see that in iOS Safari, where the icon was actually there because the character, they had support for that character. We see that we only changed this part. Like these buttons never moved. The image here didn't move. And so this looks to me like a pretty good change. And if we scroll down to where so this is the mini controls, we can look at, make sure that when we have no track selected, it looks right. We have the apple there. And we also see, and this is important, we see that the mini controls, if we scroll down your loading screen, mini controls with track selected did not change.
Yes.
So that's really important feedback too. Like we didn't screw up the other variant of this component. So Can
you go back to diffs and show the swipe? I want everyone to see the swipe because
everyone loves the swipe.
Yeah.
So swipe will sort of give you the 2 images on top of each other, and then it'll show one on the left and the later one on the right.
It's such a cool widget.
So these tools are all like, they all fit different diffs. So sometimes it's really, really hard to see diffs in this diff view because there are way too many changes. And then the side-by-side is a lot easier. So and sometimes you need the swipe to really see the details. You can do stuff, you can zoom into these if you really need to like nail down the diff that was introduced. And so the last thing we want to do here now is, so on the left here, we have this panel where it says that status right now is that this diff needs review. So we'll click that review button or the drop down, and we'll select this accept option here. So it'll say accepted and then print my name. And then if we go back to the pull request, we can already see that it's now green. So we can bring back that again. So it says approved by Henrik. We can merge this, and then the next pull request that we work on will then be based off of my change that I introduced. So, and this is 95% of the Happo flow. Like you don't spend too much time in Happo land. Like you look at diffs every now and then, you approve or reject them. And there are like, I mean, there are a lot of other features in Happo. If you, over time, if you use Happo a long time, you'll start collecting this sort of component gallery. This is a component gallery from Happo.io itself, which is, so I'm testing Happo with Happo, of course. And so these are all the components that I have on the website. And you can do stuff like compare with earlier versions. You can compare across different browsers. You can look at
amazing, yeah.
Stuff like what did Firefox look like as compared to Edge, and you can you can do all kinds of things with this in this component library. Oh, that's a large diff.
This is excellent. Thank you for showing it, Henric.
Thanks.
We have a couple of questions, but I want to finish because we have like a minute or two.
Okay.
Let's see if it refreshes. This is a thing, right? What about minor changes in resolutions, how browser renders, right? Like false positives.
Yeah.
And this is a huge problem of doing it yourself, right? What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, that's always going to, I mean, I would say it comes back to bite most people at some point. The thing like, if you're doing this yourself, you're going to spend 90% of your time just working through all these browser differences. Happo and other tools, they all have this built in. So we do certain things for IE that if you look at it, you'll be like, why are we doing this? And it's like, well, it does create consistent snapshots. And for 6 months, we had this bug with Chrome where border radius would render slightly differently. And it ended up being a bug in some rendering engine used by Chromium. And we ended up filing a bug report. I didn't, but I got some help doing that. And it got fixed, I think, or we used a flag to like work around it. And so this is like providing consistent screenshots is what we spend most of our time doing. And that's, I think, key to using these tools. And yes, you are going to end up with a couple of spurious diffs every now and then, but there are ways to get those resolved and get to a point where you have stable screenshots.
Thank you, Henric. And because it's top of the hour, thank you so much for spending so much time with like our audience. I want to finish with one last question. Can you provide us with a roadmap for further development of Happo? What's in your future?
I mean, I'm super happy about just integrating with different systems. Like, I think we're at a stage now where we've sort of resolved most of the quirks with different browsers and just getting the review flow working, but just like collaborating with people like you and other companies, just making it easier for our customers to get their UI tested. And we want to be like, I don't want people to, I want people to use the tools that they're using. I want them to come to us and then ask for if we could integrate with this system, or because we want to be where our customers are. I think that's the most straightforward word.
That's a great answer.
Yeah,
that's a great answer.
Thanks.
So if you haven't tried, give Happo a try, convince your team, right, to test it out, and you'll have better tests and a better looking application that will not change day to day for the worse. So thanks everyone who joined us. Thank you, Henric, so much. This was great. I really appreciate it. And to everyone, stay healthy and happy testing.